It had been an ordinary day. The sun was out, and Elizabeth had just left the market with some bread and a few apples. She leaned on her cane, walking slowly but steadily. As she stepped outside the door, a hand touched her arm, gently, hesitantly. Startled, Elizabeth turned. Standing before her was a man in his 40s, eyes glassy with emotion, lips trembling. And then he said the words that shattered her sense of reality. "Mum, I finally found you." Elizabeth's heart pounded in her chest. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice tight and unsure. The man stepped back, wiping his tears. "You're Elizabeth, right? Elizabeth Hartman?" She nodded slowly. "I'm David. You don't know me, but I'm your son." Elizabeth's expression stiffened. "There must be some mistake," she said. "I had one child, and he passed away in 1982. The man didn't argue. Instead, he reached into his shirt and pulled out a necklace, a small worn gold locket, engraved faintly with the letters LH. Elizabeth gasped. That locket had only belonged to one person, her son Leo, and she had buried it with him. The man took a step back. "I know you're confused. I want to explain everything. Please, give me 5 minutes." Elizabeth stared at him. People walked past them on the street. None of them knew the weight of that moment. Finally, she nodded. "There's a bench in the park," she whispered. "Let's talk there." They sat on a quiet bench shaded by an old maple tree. "I'm David," he said again, "born in 1958, but I don't remember much of my childhood." He paused. "Until last year, I started having dreams, nightmares, lavender fields, a woman's voice calling my name, again and again." Elizabeth said nothing. The only sound was the soft breeze and birdsong. The name still echoed, "David, David, where are you?" David explained he had grown up in foster care. No birth certificate, no adoption papers, just a file number. He had always felt like a piece of him was missing. Years later, he'd taken a DNA test, and the results were shocking. A 99.8% parent-child match with one person, Elizabeth Hartman. Elizabeth shook her head. I had one child," she repeated. "Leo, and he died. That pain never leaves you. I would remember if I had another." David lowered his gaze. "I understand, but what if it happened before Leo?" Her breath caught. "No," she said firmly, "that's impossible." But deep inside, something stirred. That night, Elizabeth dug through old boxes, medical bills, letters, postcards, and then one file, yellowed, fragile, a hospital record dated 1958. Postpartum trauma, patient shows signs of memory repression. No baby name, no gender, just a case number, DH1958. Her hands began to tremble. That night, she dreamed of lavender again. A younger version of herself sat under the sun, weeping. A baby in her arms, silent, still. She rocked him and whispered, "They took him from me." Elizabeth woke up screaming, and she remembered she had been 17, pregnant, ashamed. Her family had called it a disgrace. They forced her to give birth in secret, then took the child away immediately. They told her it was a miscarriage. She believed them. She had no choice. Her pain was buried. So was her memory. Until now. The next day, David returned. This time, he brought old photos, faded, worn. One showed the backyard of a house Elizabeth hadn't seen since 1960, a house she never told anyone about. Her breath caught. "You really are my son," she whispered. In the weeks that followed, they met regularly. They shared meals, talked about books, looked through old photo albums together. David met Elizabeth's granddaughter, Aria. One afternoon, Aria looked up at David and asked, "Are you my dad's brother?" David smiled, unsure what to say. But Elizabeth just watched them, silent, peaceful, and for the first time in years, she felt whole. Months later, Elizabeth visited Leo's grave. She laid fresh lavender and closed her eyes. "Goodbye, Leo," she whispered, "and welcome home, David." Then she reached into her bag and placed something beside the headstone. 2 lockets, one old, one new, engraved E and D, and in that moment, the past didn't hurt quite as much anymore. That evening, Elizabeth invited David over for tea. She brought out an old photo album from the bottom shelf, one she hadn't opened in decades. Together, they turned its pages. There were pictures of young Elizabeth as a teen, standing in front of a small farmhouse. Photos of family picnics where she looked happy, but always a little distant. "Do you see this?" she said, pointing to a photo. "This was the summer of 1958. That's when I disappeared for a while." David leaned closer. "You were gone?" Elizabeth nodded slowly. "They said I had the flu, that I stayed with a relative in New York, but I don't remember that trip. I just remember being alone, cold and crying." David sat back in silence. The album lay open between them, no longer just paper but a map of forgotten truths. That night, Elizabeth woke up in the dark. The room was quiet, too quiet. And yet she heard something, a voice, software familiar. "You didn't forget me, Mama. You just weren't ready to remember." She sat up, heart racing. There was no one there, but she wasn't scared. She whispered into the silence, "I remember now." Weeks passed. Elizabeth and David began spending more time together. They visited small towns trying to track down the records of the hospital that took her in. Much of it had been destroyed in a fire years ago. But in a dusty box in a rural archive, they found one more document. Infant male, code DH1958, placement confidential, request for silence filed by patient's family. Elizabeth stared at the paper. It didn't change what had happened, but it confirmed what her heart already knew. One afternoon, little Aria came into the living room with a crayon drawing. It showed 3 stick figures. One was labelled me, one Grandma, and one David. David smiled. Aria added something else, above all 3 figures, a big heart. Elizabeth blinked back tears. For the first time in decades, that ache in her chest loosened. A month later, Elizabeth went to a locksmith. She brought an old jewellery box. Inside it were 2 new gold lockets, one for Leo, one for David. "Engrave the same initials," she said, "E and D." "Would you like a message inside?" the man asked. She thought for a moment, then smiled. "To the sons I never stopped loving. Even when I didn't know, I still did." Some memories hide to protect us. Some truths wait quietly at the edge of our lives until we are ready to hear them. Elizabeth had lost a son, and unknowingly she had found another, not as a replacement, not as redemption, but as a reminder. The heart remembers what the mind forgets. And sometimes love comes back with a whisper. The end.